Hi, everybody. My name is Loretta Coil, and I am a consultant with Adkins and Company, and I am here to help you get started on developing your special education program. I know that you are a new school, and we are here to help in any way that we can to make your program as successful and compliant as possible. So we are going to get ourselves started. First of all, for our agenda, I want to go over what you can expect for today. First of all, we will review what that support looks like for you in the course of this school year as a brand new school and starting your special education program. So that will be outlined for you. Next, we will talk about Ohio's operating standards for the education of children with disabilities. This is really your go-to spot for any questions, concerns, whatever have you, to answer anything that you have in regards to special education for the state. This is where you need to look. From there, we'll talk about the transfer or adoption process. Your brand new school, every single student coming into your building is brand new. And for any students with disabilities, there needs to be a process in place in order to make sure that you are identifying all the new students that are students with disabilities that prompts you to get started in some processes. Next, we'll talk about EMIS, which is the Education Management Information System. Basically, it's the house where everything data is put in regards to your school in the state. So, for example, in the area of special education, information would be given to EMIS regarding what was the date we held an IEP or individualized education program meeting. When was the date consent was signed, giving permission to start an evaluation on this student? All of that goes to EMIS, which is given to the state. Next, we'll talk about due dates in special education and reporting. From there, we're moving on to a special education spreadsheet. So every intervention specialist should have their own spreadsheet, and there should also be one for the entire school, making sure that you're staying compliant with all of the dates and meetings. Next, how to create your schedule. And lastly, we'll talk about weekly meetings. All right, so let's talk about that overview of support that Adkins and Company will be providing to you. So every month, we will be doing an online training on specific topics or processes in special education. So we've outlined a few of our trainings that we are definitely going to get started with that we felt were best for you for this point in time in the year as you are rolling out your program in special education. If you should have any ideas or things that you think, geez, I'd really like to have more information in regards to this area of special education or this topic, definitely let one of us know, and we can certainly see if we can add that into our list of topics to present every month. From there, every single month, your school will be visited by either Ben Daniels or Dr. Kim Fuller, and they will be coming monthly to look at specific items within your special education program. Now, keep in mind, this is not a time that we're going to come in and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that, or try and find something that you did wrong. Not the purpose of our visits at all. We want you to be successful. We want you to be compliant, and we are here to offer support and assistance to make that happen as you set up your special education program. So when they come and visit, you'll always know who's coming. You'll always know what the topic is. And in this doing so helps you to prepare for their visit so you get the most out of the visit when they are there. Lastly, if you have any program questions, anything of that nature, you can certainly reach out to me, Loretta Coil, and below is my email address, lcoil@adkinsandcompany.com. All right, so let's talk about Ohio's operating standards. So this is the go-to document for any questions or concerns related to special education. This document was updated in December of 2023, and it articulates all federal and state regulations regarding special education. So anything that's in the state, that anything that a special education teacher or school has to do in the area of special education, or any services that must be provided and how this all must be done, is all articulated in Ohio's operating standards. So my advice to you is to print this off, download it on your computer. It's over 200 pages. And I know for myself, I made a copy of it. I have tabbed every single chapter, one color of a sticky note, and any notes within those chapters, anything of importance or hot topics in special education or places I think, geez, I'm probably going to be looking this up a couple of times before I really understand what they mean. I have earmarked that. So when you get some time, definitely print this off and get started reviewing it and really trying to figure out where things are located in that book. So just to continue our conversation regarding the operating standards. So as I said, it outlines the state and federal requirements for special education. Now keep in mind, the federal requirements come from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004. And so these are all, combined into this one document. And again, this is the one and only place you need to go first to try and find the answers to your questions. Any additional information you need, or maybe need some more explanation, anything like that, we can certainly help you. Also, the operating standards ensure that all students with disabilities, SWD, have access to a free and appropriate public education. I'm hopeful that many of you have heard of a FAPE before, or providing FAPE before. And basically what that means is this. So it needs to be free, obviously, when students come to your school. They don't have tuition or anything, it's free. Obviously, you're a public school, so we're meeting that aspect of FAPE, but it also has to be appropriate. So for students with special education needs, we need to make sure that whatever services or education program that we're providing for them meets their individual needs. And so the IEP is the best place to look at to find out what that means for that particular student. And the individualized education program, or IEP, will articulate that, but it will be different for every single student. So just to make sure that as you are looking at, for example, the student has a reading comprehension goal, how much time per week should I be working with this student? Is it based on section 7 of that IEP? Am I pushing into the classroom? Am I pulling out? What does that time I'm with that student really look like? So it has to be appropriate for every single student. And lastly, the rules fall under State Rule 3301-51. And you'll notice on the next slide, there's a table of contents, which will articulate what each of the chapters are. So if you look at it, for example, and you say, hey, I've got a question in regards to how often do I need to give the procedural safeguards to parents, their rights? And that's in section 05. So it's in section 3301-51-05. If you think, geez, I can't remember, and we have a student that we want to initially evaluate, now I've got the parent's consent. How much time does the school have to complete that evaluation? It's actually 60 days, but that's going to be found in 3301-51-06. So by earmarking every single chapter, with sticky notes or however you wanted to do that will help you better find that information in a much more faster and simpler fashion. One thing that somebody told me a long time ago, which I found really interesting, I was a special education director, and they said to me, when people ask you questions, you sound like you know a lot more when you say to them, for example, they might say, hey, how often do I have to have an IEP meeting? And instead of me saying, hold on, let me look at the operating standards, I say to them, that will be in the operating standards in section 3301-51-07. And they think to themselves, wow, she really knows what she's talking about. So just something to think about. But again, any questions or concerns that you have, always look there first for answers. And I tell you, you'll probably find the answer you're looking for. So moving on to transferring of documents or adopting documents. So you are a brand new school, which means every single student coming to your building is also brand new. So when those files come in for every single student, you need to be looking for any documentation of an ETR, evaluation team report, any IEP, individualized education program, and any thing related to a disciplinary record, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. So obviously, schools are required when a student transfers out to send any special education information to the schools, the ETR and the IEP. However, what you're going to find, some schools will send you everything you could possibly need. Some schools will not. You may get 1 page of the ETR or 2 pages of the IEP, or maybe get none of those documents, you might only get a progress report. Either way, that is indicating that that student did receive special education. So now you're on the hook for FAPE. You need to provide that student an appropriate, free, and public education. And so those are the things that you're looking for within those documents. New with the updated operating standards as of December of 2023, schools are now required to send disciplinary records when a student leaves. So not only are you now looking for an ETR, you're looking for an IEP, you're also looking for any disciplinary records. So let's say a school sends you an ETR, totally complete, has everything single page, same thing with the IEP, but you do not receive any disciplinary records. Definitely call up that school and say, hey, we didn't get any disciplinary records. Can you send them our way? Just gives you some more information on how to help that student with any needs that they may have in the area of discipline. Notice the 03 after the discipline records, that is the chapter in your operating standards where this new rule was added in regards to disciplinary records. So my advice when you're reviewing files, you're all new at your school, 100% from your office manager to your teachers, maintenance, whatever the case may be. I would really highly encourage the intervention specialists to look through every single file. Your office managers have a lot going on and they may not know all the different pieces and parts of an ETR, an IEP, or a disciplinary record, and they may miss some of that information. So definitely spend some time reviewing documents and files on every single student that comes in the room. Anybody you identify that has any indication of special education, put them over to the side to deal with here in just a little bit. I'll get started on that process. Also for any office managers, office staff, anybody, anytime any records come in at all for any student, definitely date stamp those, especially for special education students. I cannot implore you enough to make sure that you do that. It's not required. However, it is very, very helpful. So if you look at my bullet point right underneath that second bullet point that says, once you review records, the school has 30 days to adopt or go through the process and complete new ones, which is in 06 of your operating standards, chapter 06. So what that means is this. So let's say you have an ETR that comes in and completes. It's not date stamped, and you have no idea when when those records came. What then is going to be used as the date the student enrolled. So let's say the student enrolled on August 1st, but the records didn't come until August 29th. All right, and let's say you start school September 1st. And so it's September 1st, you're like, okay, you know, what the heck? I need to get started with adopting these documents. You've already missed your 30 days. You have 30 days, not it's 30 calendar days. You have 30 days to transfer those, meaning you're adopting them so that they are a full-fledged member of your school. And I'll explain how that's done in a second. Or within that 30 days, you're saying, geez, this ETR is missing signatures. This IEP is missing pages, whatever the case may be. And you think, geez, we can't accept this, because once you accept it, you're on the hook for it. And so if you think, geez, we need to rewrite this IEP, you're given 30 days to do that. But it starts the minute those records come in, if the records were date stamped. So if they were date stamped on August 29th, for example, even though the student enrolled August 1st, you've got a lot more time once you realize, geez, I need to start doing something. So date stamp, date stamp, date stamp every single time. That 30 days moves so fast. It will be gone before you know it. So always date stamp any single record that comes in, especially for students with disabilities. So again, you have to provide a FAPE to any new student that comes in or comparable services until you adopt the IEP or develop a new one. And so when an IEP comes in, let's say you only get a page, and let's say it's date stamped for the 15th of August, and you've spent 2 weeks trying to contact the old school. You've contacted mom, please go over to the school, pick up a completed copy of that IEP. Mom, do you have a completed copy of the IEP? And let's say after 2 weeks of that 30-day timeline, you don't have anything. I would start gathering together that IEP team and start writing an IEP. And you might say, whoa, Loretta, hold on a second. We don't know this kid. I know you don't know this kid, but you have 30 days to adopt or rewrite that IEP. You need to get something together as quickly as you can to meet that 30-day timeline. And then after a couple of months, you could certainly come back to the table once you know the student better. You have data available and say, you know what, we're going to write this IEP now that we know this student. So you just do the best that you can under the circumstances you're handed. So you either adopt or you create your own. So I wanted to let you know too, that whenever you're adopting an IEP, okay, always look to make sure in an IEP or ETR, all the sections are completed, there are signatures, all of those kinds of things. But you cannot adopt an IEP without adopting the ETR ever. And so what I mean by that is if you're going to go into EMIS, our Education Information Management System, we say, you know what, we're going to adopt this IEP. We held the meeting on August 15th. I sent a prior written notice afterwards. I gave the parent an invitation beforehand, and we've adopted it. Now that I've sent out the prior written notice, everything's kosher with the IEP. There is nothing your EMIS coordinator, Tina, can do with that, because the ETR is the document that created the decision of, yes, this student needs special education. So we can't put in the system, oh, we've got a student with an IEP, if there was no ETR in the system to even say, A, the student has a disability, and B, what is their disability category? So ETR, you have to adopt an ETR before you even consider adopting an IEP. I will give you, I think it's on the next slide here in just a second, because you will run into an issue with that, but I think it's on the next slide. If there are no complete records, obviously contact the previous school. You'll be shocked how many parents have a completed copy of the IEP. So definitely reach out to parents, reach out to schools. I sent parents over to the schools. We've gone over to schools ourselves to pick up records. Whatever you can do to get those records, do to get those records. Make sure the ETR and IEP, I have all the sections filled in, dates are all there, it makes sense. They're aligned with one another, and also make sure their end dates are. One thing I want you to remember is when you look at the end date of the ETR and end date of the IEP, that always remains the same. So let me give you an example. So let's say the previous school had an ETR meeting, or let's say a reevaluation meeting. Let's say they did it May 1st of 2024, or let's say May 1st of 2023. And now the student is coming and you've adopted that ETR in August of 2024. And so that ETR is 1 year old. That ETR date, remember, it's due 3 years later. So it was done in 23. It's due again in 2026. Just because a student started in your building doesn't mean it's now due 2027, a year later than that. None of the end dates on those IEPs or ETRs changed. So if the IEP ETR was written in May of 2023 and you've adopted the document this school year, that ETR is still due to be done again in May of 2026. Those just stay the same. All right, so moving on, I've got some more information for you for transferring. So always, whenever you are adopting documents, you always have to send a parent invitation, always. So go in, I know you guys are getting Same Goal or already have Same Goal or IEP Anywhere as your online program. Just upload a parent invitation, fill in all the information. On that parent invitation, you can certainly mark that you're going to adopt the ETR and you're going to adopt the IEP. You can have that both on the parent invitation. You could have a parent invitation that says, we are adopting the ETR and not adopt the IEP. You may have said, geez, the IEP isn't complete. There are no signatures. We have to redo the IEP. So you could certainly adopt the ETR, but not the IEP, or you can adopt them both. So after that meeting is completed, there needs to be a prior written notice or PRO1, and there have to be 2 of them. So let's say the parent comes in, you've decided to adopt the ETR and adopt the IEP. You think, geez, why can't I just write a prior written notice saying I'm adopting the ETR and I'm adopting the IEP, and here's why. State won't allow that. You have to have a prior written notice saying, we're adopting the ETR. This is all the information from that meeting. This is what we discussed. Then you write another prior written notice. We're adopting the IEP. This is all the information from the meeting, and send that to the parent. There have to be 2 prior written notices, one for each item you are adopting. So here we go with EMIS. So a DCF, data collection form. So we can't call up our EMIS coordinator, who for you guys is Tina Walsh. We can't call her up and say, hey, Tina, I just had a meeting for an ETR, and the ETR, we've adopted it, and the adoption date was August 15th. She needs that in writing. And so the data collection form, not a required form in the state of Ohio. However, the form that they provide on their site is simply one that includes all of the information that our EMIS coordinator would need in regards to special education. So my advice to you is use the form that's available. And we'll look at it here in just a second. It is confusing to look at, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple to fill out. Every single time you have an ETR meeting, adoption, reevaluation initial, an IEP meeting, annual or an initial, the minute that's done, boom, you need to send a DCF, data collection form, to Tina with that information. And because this is where our funding comes from, which I'll talk about in just a second. So once we have those meetings, please make sure you're sending that DCF to Tina or your EMIS coordinator within 24 hours of your meeting. This ensures she has time to put it in the system, and it ensures funding will follow that student, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. So remember how I said that you cannot adopt an ETR. You cannot adopt an IEP without the ETR. 100%, I guarantee you this year, it is going to happen where you are only going to get an IEP and you're not going to get an ETR. So what do I do on the DCF? Because we need, as a school, we have to start receiving funding for a good student. And how can we do that if we don't have an ETR? Because an ETR starts the funding. So this is what you do. So on the form, which I'll show you in just a second, you're going to mark NIEP, meaning we have the ETR already been adopted, but I have N, no IEP. You're marking that on the IEP, and all that is doing is signaling the state, start my funding now, because it means that services will be provided while we're in contact with the previous school for the rest of the IEP document, or that you are going to create one of your own when complete IEPs are not provided. So that's what NIEP means. You have got to start receiving funding for a student, and without an IEP in place, you are not able to provide that at all. So in the meantime, if you say, well, geez, what kind of services am I going to be providing, Loretta? I don't have an IEP to even look at what that might look like, or I only have 2 pages of the IEP, or I only have the progress reports of the IEP. How am I supposed to know the services? You call up that parent as fast as possible. You call up the previous school. What were the goal areas? What kind of services did you provide? You do the best that you can with the information you have, and you start providing that student services. But one thing I do really want to remember, that data collection form is so, so important. That is where our funding starts. So when you adopt an ETR or evaluation team report, what you're saying to the state is, we've got a brand new student named Sally, and she's a student with a specific learning disability. And therefore, I need all the funding for this category of disability to start being funneled to my school. And doing that right away ensures that you receive the most funding possible. So let's just say on down the line, you've got Sally, who, let's say, enrolled and her records were adopted, let's say August 15th. So roll on forward to December 15th, and you think, oh my gosh, why isn't Sally on the list of students who we're getting funding for? This is odd. What happened? And you realize, oh my gosh, I forgot to send over the data collection form, letting my EMIS coordinator know Sally is a new student and should be receiving funding under the learning disability category. So you quickly complete it, you send it off, and now you start receiving funding. Here's the issue with that. Had you done it in the beginning, your school would have received full funding. So let's just say, for example, for a student with a specific learning disability, let's say the school gets $10,700. So if you send that off right away after that adoption meeting to your EMIS coordinator, you will get full funding. But if you wait on that DCF and you don't send it until December, you're not getting full funding. And that's what's so important. You want to get full funding for every single student. So after these meetings, do not wait to fill out that EMIS or that DCF form. Fill it out within 24 hours of the meeting and send it off to your EMIS coordinator so you can ensure the most funding for your building. And at the very bottom, I have included a link for the DCF form, which we're going to see next. All right, so this is a copy of the form. So if you notice on the data collection form, it looks very, very confusing, and I promise you it's not as confusing as it looks. But the very first box indicated by that arrow is the NIEP. So you're just including the date of the meeting, you're including the category of disability, and then the other information that is there. And then I sign it on the next page, and then you just send it off to your EMIS coordinator. If they have questions, they will certainly call you and ask you the questions or whatever. But this is where you want to indicate, we never received an IEP, but I have adopted or maybe didn't even adopt an ETR. All I have is an IEP or a partial IEP. This starts the funding for the kid. So NIEP and all of those instances. All right, moving on. So a little bit more about transferring documents. So I cannot tell you enough. You have got to stay within that 30-day timeline. So the minute that it's date stamped, whatever documents are coming in, you've got 30 days to adopt or create your own document. If there is no date stamp, the date will be when the student enrolled. And some of your kids, I don't know when your school's officially opened. Maybe they enrolled July 1st. But the key is, when did those documents come? That's what your date stamp, and that is where the 30 days is coming from. So be sure to scan a copy of the adopted documents into Same Goal or IEP Anywhere. I hear it called both Same Goal or IEP Anywhere. So the minute you get an ETR or you get an IEP, you get a progress report, you get discipline records, upload it into Same Goal or IEP Anywhere, because then it's there for everybody to see. So every service provider, your speech and language pathologist, your occupational therapist, your physical therapist, your special education director, your principal, whoever needs access then is able to see it when they can. They don't have to go back to the cumulative file in the front office, pull it out, make a copy of it, or do whatever they need to do. It's right there. And your, let's say, speech and language provider, let's say you have Sally who has a related service of speech, she can go right into Same Goal. All right, what am I supposed to be working on with Sally? Because I know we adopted this document, and they've got it right there. So any new documents you get, upload them into Same Goal, especially because you are a new school. You've got nothing to go on other than these records. So upload them onto Same Goal and IEP Anywhere. The next bullet down is you want to make sure that any ETR and IEP dates are added to your special education spreadsheet, which we'll talk about in a minute. You want to add any new students onto that spreadsheet to make sure you're staying in compliance with those due dates. And lastly, on this page, every single teacher, for every single teacher or staff member who would be working with the student in any capacity in your building, has to be told what the disability is and the services that need to be provided to that student. If the student has a behavior intervention plan, such as a BIP, they need that information as well. And so just seeing a teacher, you know, Mrs. Smith in the hallway, hey, Mrs. Smith, Sally's coming to you. She has a goal in reading comprehension. She has a goal in math and in writing. I just want to let you know, not enough information. So because you guys don't have access to the online version of that IEP, you cannot print off the IEP at a glance page. So my advice to you is to run off the goal pages, run off section 7 SDI page, specially designed instruction, which articulates who's providing it, how much time a week are you providing it, and what does it look like, accommodations, modifications, things of that nature. I'd run off section 12, which is the testing page. So when I take our state assessments, these are the accommodations the student can have. And then if there's a behavior intervention plan, run that off and give that to the teachers as well. However, one caveat, when you provide one of these copies for every single staff member or teacher that student has, make sure you are somewhere having them sign saying, this special education teacher talked to me about this student, and I understand the student's needs and the appropriate education I am to be providing this student in the school year. Because I'm going to tell you right now, this will happen to you during the school year. You're going to get a call from a parent. Hey, Johnny's math teacher has no idea anything about his IEP, doesn't know any of his accommodations. You have not shared that with him. And you can say, actually, I have. On August 6th at 2:40, I sat down with the math teacher, Mr. Geller, and shared with him everything, and he even signed. And so just make sure any conversations you're having with those teachers in regards to these new students, make sure that those teachers are signing to say they receive the information and they understand what their role is. Moving on. All right, so a special education spreadsheet I've mentioned a couple of times. And so what you want to make sure is, as an individual special education teacher, and I don't know how many are in your building, but each special education teacher should keep track of their own spreadsheet. And basically what I'm saying is, you've got a spreadsheet, has a student's name, has a student's grade, their disability category, when their last ETR meeting was, what the end date is, same thing with the IEP meeting date, the IEP end date, any related services, OT, speech, physical therapy, what kind of tests are they taking, the standard test or the alternate test. The majority of your students are going to be taking the standard test with accommodations. Very, 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 very rarely are you going to have a student that's going to take the alternate assessment. Anybody with transition goals, yes or no, and then a behavior intervention plan date, if applicable, if you've got a student on a behavior plan. You want to constantly be looking at this. The minute you have an ETR meeting or an IEP meeting, you go back to your spreadsheet and you change those dates to make sure you're updated. On top of all of that, there should be one complete spreadsheet that you're keeping track of. So what I would do you should be as a team meeting every week, but one time per month, I would be calling up your EMIS coordinator and scheduling a meeting with her one day per month and have her say to you, all right, this is my spreadsheet and these are the dates that I have. What are the dates that you have? And make sure you're talking the same language. So for example, your EMIS coordinator might have down that an IEP is due February 6th. And on your spreadsheet as the intervention specialist, you put down, let's say February 1st. It was just, just a mistake that happened. We're all human, it can happen. You've got to make sure you guys have the exact same dates. So every single month, you want to make sure, number one, is your EMIS coordinator updating the EMIS system with the correct IEP and ETR dates and the other dates that go along with special education. Are they updating them quickly and accurately? Because those are really the most important, but do your dates coincide with what she has to make sure you're remaining as compliant as possible? All right, moving on to our weekly schedule. So as a special education teacher, you need to come up with what does your schedule look like on a week-to-week basis. The only way you can come up with this is by looking at every single student's IEP. So let's say you are a school, and let's say you have grades, 6, 7, and 8. And so let's say you've got 10 kids within those grade bands. And you say to yourself, okay, so I've got 10 kids. I'm going to look at section 7 of the IEP. What are the goal areas and how much time per week am I supposed to see them in that goal area? So what you'll notice on section 7, it might say reading comprehension, 45 minutes per week, intervention specialist. So for Johnny, every week I need to earmark 45 minutes for him to work on reading comprehension. Now it doesn't have to be 45 minutes in one sitting. It could be 20 minutes one day, 15 minutes another day, 10 minutes another day, however it works into your schedule. But you need to look at every single goal area for the student and all of the time required based on that last IEP. You can't look at an IEP and say to yourself, geez, that's a lot of time. I simply don't have time for this. There's no way I can fulfill this IEP. Yet it's got to be appropriate. It's not appropriate to you as the intervention specialist and your busy schedule. It's appropriate to the student. So please keep that in mind. You can certainly, when you're transferring documents or adopting documents and you're on your own, you can certainly adopt some of what's there. But it's got to be very minor things that you're adopting. So I would encourage you to look up, what that means and what the state says in regards to adoptions and making amendments to adoptions, because you always want to keep in mind it has to be appropriate to the student, not appropriate to me or my time management. The next bullet says to work with general education teachers. So once you've said, all right, I've got 10 students and I've worked out all their goal areas, I've worked out the amount of time they need for each goal area. Now you're going to go to that general education teacher and say, okay, Mrs. Susie Q, I've got these students that are in your math class, and I notice some students are there from 10 to 11, some others are there from 12 to 1. And so how are you going to work out those with math goals within that classroom? Are you going to push in? Are you going to pull out for services? Number one, what does Section 7 of the IEP say to be able to do? And that's, that's another way that you're going to kind of figure out what your schedule looks like. And general education teachers, it is so frustrating to have students coming and going if they're being pulled out for services, or they've got related services such as speech, and they're being pulled out of your math class every Tuesday from 1 to 1:30. It is so frustrating for you as a general education teacher, and I'm so sorry that's the case. But what we provide to those special education students has to be appropriate to their needs. And so if you are getting to a point where you're like, geez, this is really impacting the education I'm able to provide for the child, I would just encourage you to talk with that provider, whether it's a speech and language provider, intervention specialist, and see if something else can be worked out. But just know, as an former special education teacher myself, sometimes it's real hard to find a time that works for every single teacher, for every single student to receive their services. So we just need to give grace to the general education teachers. We also need to give grace to those service providers, such as our intervention specialists, our OTs, speech and language provider, things of that nature. So every single week, if you've got a reading comprehension goal of 45 minutes per week, you're providing that every single week. Obviously, unless there's a holiday or a break, you're not going to. If the student's absent, you're not making that up. If you're absent, though, you're making that up. Or maybe there's a sub in place or something of that nature. But all hours every week have to be provided. You can never say to a parent, if a parent comes in, you're going to get one of these in your tenure as a special education teacher, you are not providing Johnny any of his hours or all the hours on his IEP. You've got to have that written down, what you're doing and what you're providing. So I saw Johnny on, let's say September 15th. We were working on goal number 6, reading comprehension. I worked with him from 10 to 10:30, and this is what we did. This was the assessment I gave to him. You always want to make sure you've got that backup for those parents. And you can never say to them, I am so sorry. I had all these tests all week long. Then my principal called me for a meeting. Then I had an IEP meeting. I could not give your child all of the hours indicated on their IEP. That can never happen. You always have to provide the hours on that IEP every single week. And lastly, once you feel as though you've got a schedule and you think, oh my gosh, I really think this is working or will work, have a colleague, your principal, another administrator, look it over. Say to them, here are all the goals for all of my student IEPs and the time period they need, and just have them spot check. Maybe they choose 3 students on there and they look at then section 7. Okay, for this student, 45 minutes reading comprehension, 30 minutes a week in writing, and 1 hour per week in basic reading skills. And they have to make sure, go through and total it up and make sure it's all there. You've got to meet those hours of every single student on an IEP. Lastly, we're going to talk about special education meetings. And so I know, from time to time, you'll roll your eyes and you'll say, oh my gosh, do I have to go to another meeting? Yes, you do. These special education meetings are super duper important. Compliance is #1 in special education. If you're not compliant, you may get a corrective action plan. You may have your sponsor coming into the school and saying, hey guys, what's going on around here? You know, you may have parents making complaints to the state. You don't want any of that. So as a special education team, you want to make sure you're all on top of each other. So if there are 3 intervention specialists in the building, you've got one spreadsheet with all the IEP and ETR due dates. You're constantly asking, hey, how are you doing on the Hayes' IEP? I know that's coming up in 2 weeks. How are you doing on that ETR, which is due in 2 months? Have you contacted the school psych? Have they started testing that child yet? You're all keeping a track of one another, not to have a gotcha moment or, geez, you're not doing your job. Not at all. You need, the whole entire school has to stay compliant, and this is the best way to have that happen. The other thing is with your special education meetings, you can say to them, oh my gosh, I'm having a terrible time with Johnny. His behavior is terrible. I need help. I've got this regular education teacher continues to come to me. I'm all out of ideas. What can I do? This is another chance for you to have those discussions, get new ideas. You have to be a tight team, your special education team, and you've got to know what everybody's doing so that you are collaborating, you're connecting, and you're staying on top of those due dates and any other aspects of special education to make sure that you're compliant. Compliancy is key. The other thing I would encourage you to do is create a calendar for the year of due dates. So make one huge calendar and put everybody in the building on there. So the ETR is due on this date for this kid. The IEP is due on this date for this kid. You could also add on there, all right, my IEP is due on December 15th for Johnny, but I'm going to begin writing that November 15th. So on November 15th, Johnny's IEP needs to start getting drafted. And so you're like, oh gosh, I'm so happy that's there. I know I have a month to start drafting this. So a calendar for the whole year of due dates is also helpful. And then lastly, as I said, you can share concerns or questions or anything like that that you have. And you know, your whole goal is to make sure you're providing the best services for students with disabilities and services that are appropriate to their needs and services that are compliant. So you don't have anybody knocking on your door saying, hey, what's going on around here? You guys seem a bit disorganized. So that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for your attention and putting up with me for this amount of time. But again, I just want to reiterate, at Adkins and Company, we are 100% here for you. We want your launch of your first school year to be a huge success, and we will provide the support to set up your special education program. If you have any questions, please reach out to your Office of Ohio School Sponsorship consultant or contact your legal counsel directly. Remember, I've left you my email address, and that every single month we'll be having monthly online trainings for you. And then we have Ben and Kim who will be coming into your building monthly. Again, we will certainly tell you when they're coming and tell you the topic that they will be looking for when they're coming so that you're better prepared. We don't ever want you to not be prepared when we arrive. So good luck on your opening of your school year. We wish you all the best. Thank you for listening.